Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, joins us now here in New York for more on the two giants' relationship souring. This is kind of a window into what you've talked so much about, this war for talent in Silicon Valley right now, centering on AI.
Yeah.
Christina mentioning those names, Tang Tan, Johnny Ive, legends kind of Apple's hardware operation, have been brought over to OpenAI to work on new products there. What does this story say about that broader fight that's taking place?
Well, I mean, this is a big story, and I would say probably actually as much about Silicon Valley's look to the future of hardware as much as it is the people. You know, if you think about the landscape of Apple and Meta as examples, trying to work out how people, consumers, use AI through different device form factors. The smartphone is what we mostly use, but glasses are coming in. People have tried pins. That's kind of the underlying layer of the story, which is interesting. But in terms of Apple versus OpenAI, the sort of full economic and litigating might of Apple against OpenAI, it's very serious.
You just referenced it, but what does this mean for OpenAI when it comes to trying to expand into hardware and when it comes to actually making money from people using AI, which is a bit of a
point. I mean, in the suit, Apple describes OpenAI's hardware effort as nascent, but you gave the key details, which is that Apple claims there are about 400 Apple alumni now working at OpenAI, and the specifics of which OpenAI executives coached those hires, as the suit alleges, on how to sort of leave Apple smoothly with, as the suit alleges, documents, etc. We don't know much about the form factor or where OpenAI is at with its device progress, but the backstory is very much bigger than that. A couple of years ago, the company started working together on software for the iPhone, integrating OpenAI's AI technology into Siri. Then Johnny Ive struck up a relationship with Apple and with OpenAI, and it's kind of soured from there. The net result, well, we don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of a with friends like you who needs friends quality to all of this. But what is the status of the kind of business relationship or partnership between these two companies?
Well, I mean, now Apple wants to go to trial with a jury trial.
Fair enough.
Right? And, it's worth pointing out that, well, what is it that Apple wants to achieve through this suit? They want OpenAI to stop what they're alleging they're doing, which is misuse of trade secrets. But more than that, the suit requests that OpenAI start again, re-engineer any hardware that Apple believes has their own technology in it. But basically, it has been souring, I think is the phrase you used, David. That's right, and it's probably kind. There was a middle ground or a middle stop between Apple's developer conference 2 years ago, where Sam Altman was there, and Apple executives were calling OpenAI the leader in the field, and they started this work on the software side, to OpenAI being very frustrated with Apple because they felt that Apple wasn't moving on the things that initial agreement had put in place. I want to point out one piece of reporting that is important. Apple had made an attempt to get OpenAI to change this behavior outside of court and basically, cease and desist. And clearly that was some months ago and that didn't work. So now we await next steps, but that's what Apple wants.
But it's so interesting to me because this is, it solidifies kind of the environment in Silicon Valley, right? But this is nothing new. Like, you can think back to like GE competitors doing this, and any big successful company, I feel like this always happens. You're the trendsetter, you're the gold standard, and then people defect and start their own things, or they poach from there because that's where it started. Like, what is the threshold for what they have to prove here?
Well,
Do they have to prove that they've actually stolen documents? They have to prove, okay.
It is very common for talented people to go from one Silicon Valley technology company to another.
Right.
So long as they are acting within the confines of the law. And, Apple speaks to this in this suit. They basically accuse OpenAI of coaching these people to avoid the dreaded walkout. So when you give your notice, everyone wants that 2-week period where you stay in post and not get walked off the premises. But as a part of that, Apple's allegation is that OpenAI encouraged those hires from Apple to use the window to access documentation, specifically, though, about unreleased products and non-disclosed technology at Apple. That's the underlying point here.
Let me make what I hope will be an elegant segue here.
Please.
So you're talking about the adventures these companies are embarking on in new hardware related to AI, and you're here in New York because you sat down with the chairman of the SK Group.
Yes.
Within that organization, there's SK Hynix, which makes these memory chips. Crucially important as we look at kind of where AI is going and where AI-related hardware is going as well. So you sat down with the chairman of that company yesterday. What did he say about the prospects for that company in this field? What's it going to mean for the production of chips broadly, for memory chips in particular going forward as we see this expansion?
Yeah, this was the biggest US first-time share sale by a foreign company. So they have their own shares in Korea, common shares that are listed in Seoul, and now they have American depository receipts. One ADR represents 1/10 of one Korean share, but it set records. They raised money for a reason. They need to build more capacity for memory chips that go into consumer electronics, like Apple makes with the iPhone, but more critically in the AI age, high bandwidth memory, which is lots of layers of DRAM memory into data centers. And the biggest takeaway for me from that is, despite their best efforts and being on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars, they say their supply may never catch up with the growing demand.
That's crazy to me. He was also, the company's been talking about how it's kind of cyclical demand, which also was confusing to me because I feel like, well, that's what I mean. Like right now, it seems like there is just demand.
So historically, memory chips are boom and bust. When there is great demand for consumer electronics, the memory chip companies ramp up capacity, and people tend to have stockpiles. Then when consumer electronics demand falls away because of an economic cycle or it's just not in vogue, sometimes those memory chip makers have been, oh no, now what do we do with all these big factories we've built and no one wants any memory chips? So they've tried to avoid that. Is the AI era different, where the data center demand for memory is sort of more linear and keeps going? And they would say, yes, it is.
A fascinating moment when he brought up the concept of memory as a service. So we think of memory as a commodity of these chips, and you teased a bit out of him in that regard. Later on, I was filling in for Ed on the show yesterday on Bloomberg Tech yesterday.
Thank you.
Talked to Professor Yu. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, you two. Do I need to be here for this?
At UCLA, who's really pioneered memory work. He says this is the next frontier. Explain what it is and sort of how that stands to change the way that we think about the compute that goes into AI.
Honestly, I don't know. He kind of did it of his own volition. But you know, in the world of AI, when you think about AI workloads, so not training AI models but running them, inference, you don't sort of necessarily, as an everyday consumer or even a software company, any company that's using AI, say, okay, I better go out and buy myself lots of chips to run this AI stuff. You rent cloud computing capacity from Amazon or Microsoft, Google, etc. And I think what he was basically saying is, instead of us selling the memory chips, kind of avoiding that boom and bust cycle, why don't we just rent out the memory capacity? Now, I think there's a lot of questions about how that would work in practice. And, I tried to say to him, how would that work in practice? It's been really interesting because the Korean press has really picked this up and run with it. It's an interesting idea, potentially higher margin. We don't know, but, that is the direction that computing is going in, and that's exciting.
And we also have some sound from your interview because the chairman said he had big plans for the U.S. So.
Yes.
The SK already invested more than $35 billion in U.S. side. My plan is at a much bigger number. So
bigger than 35
billion. Much bigger than 35.
So much bigger than 35 billion.
Much.
What is he teeing up?
I right now, again, SK, they have 60% market share, basically, in high bandwidth memory, these data center memory chips we've been talking about. In Korea, they've committed hundreds of billions of US dollars to expand their domestic capacity, Here in the US, across SK Group, to date, 35 billion. So they raised $26.5 billion selling US listed shares. Kind of seems like nothing in the grand scheme of things. But this is where the customers are, right? NVIDIA is the biggest driver of HBM adoption. For every one NVIDIA GPU, there are 8 corresponding HBM chips. So if NVIDIA is going up like that, it's logical, so would SK. So they know that's a part of it. They need to have capacity here to serve the data center build out in the United States. He just didn't give me a dollar figure. Imagine if he had. We sent a red headline on the Bloomberg terminal with that because it's a very important political thing as well, right? This nation and this administration has been very proactive in getting outside capital to commit to building things here in America.
Got about a minute left. So you say that they have the largest share of high bandwidth memory production. There's Micron, there's Samsung as well. We had Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, talking about his desire for Samsung, SK Hynix to do more here in the U.S. How resonant is that? And when you listen to him, you asked about politics explicitly, his relationship with the Trump administration. What's your read on kind of the resonance of calls like that from the Trump administration to do more here in the U.S. with a company like SK Hynix?
Yeah, and if you expand it beyond memory, TSMC as well. You know, the world is highly dependent on Taiwan for the production of the latest chips on the logic side, GPUs, compute. That is a security risk, many would say. So there's a great willingness to invest in America. The president been a good deal maker, but the debate that exists is, would they ever, Samsung, TSMC, bring their latest and greatest to America prior to bringing it to Korea or Taiwan? That seems unlikely. Yeah. So you're waiting for the great American champion to crack the technology side. But yeah, that is the direction of travel.
Ed, we've only got about 30 seconds left before we have to send you on your way back home. What other stories should we be watching on your beat? What are you looking at coming up?
Earnings, technology company earnings, and all the American public needs to know this weekend is how much money did they spend on AI, and now how much money comes out the other side. Like, what's the net result of all of this spending? This quarter seems like that will be more in focus.